I'm telling you, the absolute worst day of my life started with a bunch of random, sharp cracks of gunfire, like a broken firecracker going off every few seconds. This was out at Fort Liberty, some dusty military base out in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. The smell of burnt gunpowder hung heavy in the air, mixing with the heat shimmer coming off the cracked, black asphalt. All around me, it was nothing but the loudmouth shouts of soldiers and the clang of metal, but I, Jake Riley, the guy everyone just calls the cleaner, was stuck in the corner, trying to ignore the clock and pick up spent shell casings. My job? Just cleaning up the hot, brass garbage after these guys finished their target practice. I was the only guy on the whole damn base who wasn't born here, and my work was invisible. Nobody ever gave a damn. The soldiers acted like I didn't exist. They'd kick the casings right under my nose or mutter, "Get out of the way, dirtbag," while stepping on the ones I was reaching for with their muddy combat boots. But I just kept my mouth shut, kept my head down, and kept moving. You learn pretty quick that the only way to survive in a place like this is to kill off every emotion and empty your mind. I was just part of the scenery. Never got a first name called out loud. That day, though, the whole damn firing range was dominated by this woman. Sergeant Major Alex Vance. Holy smokes, she was something else. Her blonde hair practically glowed in the North Carolina sun, and her olive green tee, the kind you get from base supply, but somehow it made her look killer, had the big American flag design on the chest popping out. The moment she stepped up to the firing line, every eye on the range snapped to her. She knew it, too. She was the kind who soaked up attention and turned it into power. But something was off. She was clearly ticked off. Her brand new, top-of-the-line assault rifle had jammed on her at a crucial moment. She yanked the charging handle hard a couple of times, really rough, but the bullet wouldn't chamber. She looked like she was ready to kill someone right there, and her eyes, searching for a place to put that rage, landed squarely on me, Jake Riley, bent over picking up brass on the ground. A slow, hungry smile, like a predator spotting dinner, curled her lip. Then she yelled, with a voice that was clear and loud enough to get everyone's attention, but also kinda like a nasty little bell ringing, "Hey! Cleaner!" Just like that, the constant rattle of gunfire stopped dead. Every soldier on the range, wondering what the hell was going on, turned and looked at me. I slowly straightened up and lifted my eyes. My heart started to pound like a busted drum, just slamming against my ribs. Being the center of attention, that was the one thing I was always trying to avoid in this crappy world. Alex walked over, her steps slow and deliberate. A crowd of grinning soldiers started to form a ring around us, like a damn circus was about to start. She shoved the jammed rifle right up close to my face, like it was a piece of trash she wanted me to take out. "You're always staring at the damn ground," she sneered, her eyes burning into mine. "Is that all you can do? I heard you people used to be good with your hands back in the day, but I guess that was all a lie." A few of the sloppier soldiers couldn't hold back the loud, nasty laughs. I just pressed my lips together and stared back into her challenging eyes. There was a cold, icy light in them. After a brief second, she ramped it up. She had to be the queen of this domain. "Oh, I've got a great idea," she announced to the whole crowd. "If you can fix this hunk of junk for me, tell you what. I'll give you $100 as a reward." That was the trigger. The firing range erupted into a frenzy of laughter. Guys were holding their guts, collapsing to the ground, slapping their knees, and pointing at me like I was a freak in a zoo. It turned into a cruel theater, where one guy's dignity was just a cheap piece of entertainment. I barely heard the noise. All the color and sound seemed to drain out of the world. All that was real was Alex's beautiful, triumphant face in front of me and the heavy, cold barrel of the rifle shoved my way. My blood felt like it was boiling with a searing, white-hot anger. But even worse than the anger was the deep, soul-crushing humiliation. I clenched my fists so tight that my nails dug into my skin and a tiny bit of blood oozed out. Why am I here? Why am I letting her talk to me like this? Tears started to burn the back of my eyes, and I gritted my teeth hard, fighting them back. If I walked away now, this shame would be tattooed on my back forever. But what the hell could I do? I was just a cleaner. I had no rank, no power, and my words meant nothing here. Just as I was about to break, I slowly unclenched the fist that was dripping a tiny bit of blood. I slowly raised my head, and then I silently held out my hand. It wasn't reaching for the soldiers laughing at me. It wasn't reaching for Alex. It was reaching straight for the heavy, cold chunk of steel, the assault rifle, the cause of all this crap. The laughter of the soldiers started to die down, slowly turning into murmurs of confusion. Everyone was stunned by my completely unpredictable move. What the hell was I trying to do? No one, at that moment, had any idea of the real meaning hidden behind my quiet eyes. The instant my fingers touched the cold barrel of the rifle Alex had shoved at me, every sound around me faded away. The soldiers' chatter, the sound of the dry wind, even the distant echoes of the training exercise, it all seemed to disappear. Only the cool, hard feel of the steel was left, completely filling my mind. That touch, that cold, hard feel of the rifle, was a ghost I could never outrun. It was the trigger for a memory that had completely wrecked my life. 1 second, I was looking at the sunny firing range, the next, everything went dark. Then, I was back in the hell of a Southeast Asian jungle, dank earth, the smell of rot, and the pounding, vision-stealing downpour of the monsoon rain beating down on the green canopy. My fatigues, caked in mud, felt like lead. The only thing I could hear close by was the anxious breathing of my guys. "Lieutenant Colonel, we're pushing it. It's too risky. We need to swap out now." That was Sergeant First Class Johnson's voice on the radio, tight with stress. He was a good, trustworthy soldier, but you could see the fear and exhaustion all over his face. I was the leader, the guy calling the shots, and their lives hung on my next order. The pressure of that cold rifle barrel felt like the icy rain hitting my face. "Negative. We push on. The target is too close," I snapped. "If we pull back now, we lose the chance forever." That decision, that stupid, arrogant mistake, was the one I could never take back. My pride had clouded my judgment. "It's fine. My call is right. I won't lose anyone." I told myself the lie and gave the signal to advance. The earth erupted seconds later. A thunderous boom, and the ground was spitting up fire and dirt. It was a booby trap. A blinding flash of light tore through the gloom, and a wave of hot air slammed into me, throwing me backward. A high-pitched ringing took over the world, and it took what felt like forever to figure out what the hell had just happened. When the smoke and dust finally cleared, I saw hell. A scream that was close to a sob. Johnson, the guy who was right up front, was lying motionless in a pool of mud. I scrambled through the muck to get to him. He was trying to say something, his lips moving, just a faint breath coming out. I grabbed his hand, but I felt the strength draining away from him, fast. My buddy's body, which should have been warm, was getting cold in the freezing jungle rain. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Johnson. This is my fault." No matter how loud I screamed or how many tears I shed, the light never came back to Johnson's eyes. Despair completely shattered me. The silent, condemning stares of the other surviving guys were like 1,000 spears stabbing me in the back. I was supposed to be the hero, the one who protected his team and served his country. But the truth? I was just a murderer who had killed a young man with a bright future because of my own arrogance. That day, Lieutenant Colonel Jake Riley died. I buried my bright future, my pride, and everything I was supposed to be in that jungle. All I had left were the heavy chains of guilt, tying me down forever. I gasped, pulled back to reality by Alex's sneering face right in front of me. But I wasn't seeing her anymore. The cold metal of the gun I was gripping reminded me of the warmth that had left Johnson's hand. Beyond the rifle, I saw the darkness of that jungle day spreading out, and beyond that, Johnson's blood-soaked body lying still. "Hey, are you even listening to me? What's with the silence?" Alex spat out, her voice sharp. The surrounding soldiers stopped their chuckling, disturbed by my sudden quiet. My eyes were fixed on nothing. They weren't the eyes of an insulted cleaner anymore. They were the eyes of a man who had stared into the abyss of losing his men. I wasn't looking at the gun, I was looking through it, seeing my own guilt. I was feeling the heavy weight of the lives I couldn't save. The insults and the laughter didn't matter right now. The one thing that consumed me was the cold, lethal capability of this chunk of metal to take a life, and the burning, unending fury at myself for not knowing how to handle it correctly before. My focus wasn't on Alex or the soldiers, it was locked on something far beyond the gun's muzzle. No one there had a clue what I was truly seeing. Dragged back from the memory, I slowly, deliberately took the rifle from Alex's hand. The humiliation and anger that had consumed me instantly drained away, like the tide rushing out, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus. I couldn't hear the crowd anymore. There was only one job in front of me. "Hey, what are you doing? Staring at it won't fix it, man," one soldier jeered, not understanding what was happening. But he didn't get a chance to finish. Everyone around me noticed the shift in my posture and my eyes. This wasn't the intimidated cleaner anymore, it was the intense, coiled-up concentration of a beast zeroing in on its prey. Without saying a word, I slapped the magazine out of the rifle. Click. The dry, sharp sound of metal on metal was strangely clear in the noisy firing range, reaching every soldier's ear. Next, I flipped the rifle, peered into the chamber, and smoothly racked the bolt back and forth a few times. The movements were flawless, without a single wasted motion, like something I'd done hundreds of times a day. The first person to notice the sheer skill was Command Sergeant Major Davis, a crusty old-timer who was watching with his arms crossed on the edge of the line. He was one of the most senior guys on the base, a battle-hardened veteran who had seen action in 3 major conflicts. His wrinkled eyes widened in surprise. "What in the hell was that move?" he muttered. "The safety check, the basic of the basics, is the first thing every rookie learns. But the way I did it was on a different level, the speed, the precision, and most of all, the complete unity with the weapon. It was as if the steel rifle was just an extension of my hand." Noticing the change on Command Sergeant Major Davis's face, the rest of the soldiers' confusion deepened. They couldn't understand why a simple janitor was handling a weapon with the skill of a seasoned special operations operative. Jake ignored the suffocating silence, the confused stares, and the disbelief hanging in the air. He just kept working. He found a workbench nearby, spread out a grimy rag, and placed the rifle on it. Then, from somewhere deep in his pocket, it must have been a trick of the light, but it looked like he pulled it out of nowhere, he produced a tiny toolkit, the kind he usually used for fixing his cleaning gear. Click, click. He punched out the retaining pins and smoothly separated the upper and lower receivers. He pulled out the bolt carrier and the recoil spring. His fingers, precise and quick like a skilled cardiac surgeon handling a scalpel, were both careful and aggressive. The complicated, interlocked pieces of the rifle seemed to fall apart under his magical touch. The dismantled parts were laid out on the rag in a perfect, military-style parade, not a single piece out of place. No one was laughing anymore. The firing range was dead quiet. The soldiers were holding their breath, staring, completely mesmerized by the masterclass unfolding before them. Even Alex's aggressive smirk had frozen right on her face. She considered herself an expert with this rifle, but what Jake was doing was far beyond her knowledge or skill level. "That's not just taking it apart," Command Sergeant Major Davis whispered, unable to hold it in. "That's a conversation with the damn weapon. Unbelievable. That's a special forces move. And not just any move, that's the level 5 teardown that only people in weapon development know. Complete disassembly." The soldiers were visibly shocked. Special forces, that was the world of the elite, the best of the best. Why did a cleaner have that kind of expertise? With all the parts laid out, the rifle's guts were exposed. That's when Jake's fingers stopped. He didn't look at anyone, his sharp, focused eyes were fixed on one tiny spot. His fingertip pointed at a minuscule imperfection inside the receiver, a distortion, maybe half the size of a dime. It was a hidden defect from the manufacturing process, a time bomb that shouldn't show up until after 1,000,000 rounds were fired. The tension in the air was at its peak. The soldiers were holding their breath, trying desperately to figure out what he had found. Jake said nothing, just staring at the fatal flaw. That silence spoke volumes about the terrifying truth of the weapon, more clearly than any words could. In the painful stillness that held the range, the soldiers focused on the tiny metal distortion I was pointing to. It was a defect so small that even a professional armorer would need a magnifying scope to spot it. But I had found it with nothing but my naked eye and my hands. Jake's voice was the one that finally broke the silence. It was low, quiet, and carried a weight and authority he had never used before. The immediate cause of the jamming, the malfunction, was the extractor, that little piece that pulls the spent casing out, he said, his voice flat, like a university professor giving a lecture. That's a simple fix. Just swap out the part. One of the soldiers let out a small sigh of relief. But Jake wasn't done. His gaze remained locked on that minuscule distortion. The real problem isn't there, he said. He lightly traced the imperfection with his fingertip. The distortion inside this receiver. It's likely a flaw in the heat treatment during production. This is the rifle's cancer. Right now, it's just a small bend, but with the repeated impact of firing, metal fatigue will set in, and the stress will eventually concentrate right here. Though most of the soldiers didn't fully understand the technical details, the absolute certainty and cold, matter-of-fact tone in his voice sent a chill down their spines. Command Sergeant Major Davis blinked in disbelief and made a low, guttural noise. Jake continued, his words sounding like a terrifying prophecy. The next time this weapon is fired on full automatic, the internal pressure will become too much, and the chamber will rupture. The bolt carrier will be blown backward, shattering the shooter's face beyond recognition. Someone gasped loudly. The description was so specific and brutal, shattering the shooter's face, that the soldiers unconsciously covered their own. This wasn't a weapon analysis, it was a death sentence. But, how? Command Sergeant Major Davis asked, his voice shaking. There were no reports of defects on this model. It's the latest generation, supposed to be the safest on the market. For the first time, Jake looked directly at Command Sergeant Major Davis. His eyes were empty of emotion. The myth of safety is a fantasy created on a spreadsheet. The steel doesn't lie, he stated simply. That sentence hit Sergeant Major Davis and every other soldier there like a heavy spike. They had never questioned their issued weapons. They trusted the manuals, they trusted their superiors, and they simply pulled the trigger. But the man in front of them was tearing all of that down. He was on a different plane, a man who could hear the voice of the steel and understand its scream. No one looked at Jake as just a cleaner anymore. In front of Jake Riley, all of their carefully constructed experience and pride felt as fragile as a straw house. A new, terrifying word was forming in the soldiers' minds, fear. No one felt that fear more strongly than Alex Vance. Her face was past white, it was an awful shade of bluish purple. Her lips were dry and trembling slightly, and her heart was slamming violently against her ribs. A lie. That can't be true. She was the ordnance and maintenance chief for this entire unit. Every single weapon her unit used went through her final inspection before deployment. And this rifle? Just 3 days ago, she herself had conducted the final check, signing the maintenance report with a pristine, all green, no problems, and her beautiful signature. If Jake's claim was true, what did it mean for her? It wasn't just a simple mistake, it was a catastrophic military failure, a dereliction of duty that had put her comrades' lives in deadly danger. Her shining career would collapse right now. At best, she was looking at a severe demotion and a black mark on her record. At worst, a court-martial. Cold sweat burst from every pore. Jake's calm, flat words felt like a gigantic wrecking ball, destroying her future. How? How can a damn cleaner know this? Who is this man? Her mind was completely paralyzed by confusion and terror. She looked around for help, but the soldiers were only staring at her with cold, judging eyes. She was alone. Jake didn't immediately start reassembling the gun after his diagnosis. He took the grimy rag and meticulously wiped the dirt off the extractor, like he was cleaning up spilled coffee. Then, he took a tiny file from his kit and started to work on the tip of the tiny part, shaving off an infinitesimal amount of metal with millimeter accuracy. Shush. The soft sound of metal being filed was the only thing echoing in the deadly silent firing range. It sounded almost like a collective heartbeat. Everyone was glued to the impossible scene, a state-of-the-art assault rifle being fixed with an old tool carried by a cleaner. It was absolutely crazy, completely beyond reason. But the precise work being done by his fingertips was an undeniable, overwhelming reality. After a few minutes, Jake put the file down and gently touched the part to check the feel. Then, with a speed that put his disassembly to shame, he snapped the rifle back together. Catch on. Click. Metal sounds rang out, and the rifle returned to its original form, like a living thing restoring its skeleton. Finally, he slammed an empty magazine home and decisively racked the bolt back. The action was perfect. The jam was completely gone. Jake slowly stood up, the repaired rifle in his hand, and turned to Alex. She had to strain to keep her feet glued to the ground, desperate not to back away. The man in front of her was no longer the cleaner she thought she knew. His eyes were quiet, like a deep well, and it felt like he could see straight into her soul. He offered the rifle back to her. It was the same gun she had shoved at him to insult him, but now the cold barrel looked as heavy and frigid as her shattered pride. She couldn't take it. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, as if of their own accord. Touching the gun felt like admitting her guilt and her utter stupidity. It was Command Sergeant Major Davis who finally broke the silence, his voice a strained whisper that shockingly trembled for a hardened veteran. "Who the hell are you?" It was the question on everyone's mind. He wasn't a cleaner. Not just a former soldier, either. His knowledge, his skill, it was off the charts. What world did he come from? Jake didn't answer. He simply placed the rifle on the ground where Alex wouldn't take it, turned his back, and calmly walked back to where he'd been working. He reached for his mop, as if nothing had happened. It was at that moment a communications specialist came sprinting over from headquarters, tablet in hand, shouting. "Sergeant Major. We ran his ID through the base database, and he's not there." Not only that. The comm specialist swallowed hard, his finger trembling as he pointed at the screen. "We can't access his personal file. It's completely blocked at the top secret level, even the base commander can't pull it up." The blood drained from Command Sergeant Major Davis's face. A top secret level block, that was reserved for crucial individuals tied to national security, or for ghosts, people whose existence had been erased. It meant the man currently reaching for a mop was a mystery the entire country's military apparatus had to work together to hide. A cold wave of dread mixed with awe swept through the soldiers. They had just savagely insulted someone the government considered one of the most critical, top-secret assets in the entire country. The laughter was gone, replaced only by a profound, heavy silence that mirrored their own foolishness. Jake, unbothered by the commotion, calmly picked up the mop and bent down to wipe up a spilled drink on the floor. That was his job. Kuroda Kenji, a sharp voice barked, cutting through the air. It was the executive officer, standing behind the comm specialist, glaring at Jake with a murderous look. "Report immediately to the command center. You will come with us right now." The sharp command froze the air. Two military police, MPs, swiftly moved to flank Jake, their hands hovering over their holsters, ready to draw. Jake offered no resistance, no argument. He simply set the mop down gently, as if completing a quiet ritual. The soldiers watched in silence as the MPs escorted him away. They were all silently condemning themselves for laughing at him just moments before. That quiet, unmoving back was no longer a target for ridicule. It was the back of a man carrying an unfathomable mystery and a bottomless depth of pain. Alone in the circle of soldiers, Alex stared at the scene, her trembling lips pressed tight. Her terror was slowly starting to curdle into a cold, dangerous fury. In the commander's office, polished mahogany and walls lined with medals and flags, Colonel Williams, a man with the sharp eyes of a hawk, looked down on Jake standing rigidly before the desk. The executive officer stood next to him, barely hiding his hostility. "You are not authorized to sit," Colonel Williams stated in a low voice, a definitive start to an interrogation. "Kuroda Kenji. That is your name, correct? But our database says no such person exists. Care to explain that, soldier?" Jake did not answer. He just stared back at the colonel. His silence was a mark of his will, but to Colonel Williams, it looked like defiance. "Answer me. Why is your record locked at top secret? Who are you? Are we wrong to assume you are an enemy spy?" "Sir, it's useless talking to this kind of man," the executive officer sneered. "He clearly wormed his way onto this base as a cleaner to steal information about our weaponry. That little show with the rifle. It was probably a performance to flaunt his knowledge and lull us into a false sense of security." Suspicion was rapidly turning into absolute conviction. For them, the possibility that Jake was an ally was no longer even a consideration. A man with a mysterious background, high-level military knowledge, and a Japanese name, that was more than enough reason to label him an enemy. Meanwhile, Alex had retreated to her room and stood before the mirror. Her face was twisted with fear and humiliation. Her career, her pride, the trust of her peers, everything she built was collapsing because of that Japanese cleaner. "I won't let this happen. I won't let it end here." Her mind raced with desperate speed. How could she escape this mess? If she admitted Jake's diagnosis was right, her responsibility was unavoidable. Then, "I'll just make him the spy." The fact that his identity was top secret and blocked from everyone became the perfect weapon to destroy him. She could claim the rifle's defect wasn't a manufacturing flaw but sabotage he had committed. That Japanese spy planted a flaw in the US military weapon to cause an accident. By doing that, she could spin the story and become the hero who preemptively uncovered his conspiracy. A small voice of reason warned her that it was a disgusting thought, but with her future hanging by a thread, she didn't hear it. She swallowed hard and dialed the number of the Armory NCO who managed her weapon supplies. He wouldn't dare disobey her order. "I need you to carry out a task exactly as I tell you, without saying a word to anyone. This is a top-secret mission for national security." She heard confusion on the other end, but Alex continued her command in a cold, determined voice. All hesitation was gone from her eyes. In the command center, the interrogation continued. Colonel Williams slammed his fist on the desk. "This is your final warning, Kuroda. Our patience is exhausted. If you don't reveal your identity immediately, you will be detained on charges of espionage and transferred to a special facility back in the States. I trust you know what kind of place that is." It was an open threat. But Jake's expression didn't change. He finally opened his mouth, and his voice, flat and completely devoid of emotion, echoed in the room. "I am the base cleaner." That answer was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Colonel Williams's face flushed crimson with rage. This man's silence wasn't just defiance, there was something deeper, something beyond their comprehension. This unknown entity was planting an unspeakable sense of urgency and frustration in the colonel's heart. The heavy, cold door slammed shut with a final, metallic sound. It was the sound of a guillotine blade separating Jake's world from the outside. The room was a sterile concrete box, a tomb. One hard cot, one old toilet, and a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling casting a faint light on his solitude. Jake didn't sit on the bed. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall. The cold concrete bled the warmth right through his thin clothing. The angry words from the interrogation echoed in his mind, spy, traitor, but they couldn't even scratch his soul. Far deeper, a wound that would never heal was carved into his spirit a long time ago. He closed his eyes. The smell of concrete morphed into the damp earth of that long-ago day. The bare bulb turned into the blinding flash of light that tore through the darkness. He was dragged back into the nightmare. It wasn't rain. It was the sense of relief after a successful mission, riding back in the helicopter. The calm faces of his men, a mix of exhaustion and triumph. His unit had succeeded again. Everyone praised Jake as the best leader and celebrated the rise of a young hero. But then it happened. Was it the enemy's last gasp? An RPG zeroed in on the helicopter's side. The craft violently shook, lost control, and spun wildly downward, the alarm screaming as it crashed into the jungle. The hellish noise of the impact, the screams of his men, and the deafening roar of metal and fire consuming everything. When Jake came to, he had miraculously been thrown clear of the burning wreckage. The pain was searing, a piece of debris was deeply embedded in his left leg, and he was losing a terrifying amount of blood. But the pain didn't matter. In his fading consciousness, he frantically screamed his men's names. There was no reply. Just the snap and crackle of the flames and the sound of my desperate screams echoing in the silent jungle. I dragged my broken leg through the wreckage and then I saw it. My buddies, the men I'd been laughing and fighting with just yesterday, were crumpled up like broken dolls. And there was Johnson, the man who always watched my back, lying still among them. I collapsed right there. No tears came. No sound escaped my throat. All I heard was the painful, grinding noise of my empty soul, racked with agony and regret. Why? Why was I the only one who lived? If I had chosen a different route, if I had delayed our departure by 10 more minutes, a million different what-ifs burned through my brain. But no amount of regret could bring back the lives I had lost. I wasn't a hero. I was a powerless loser who had failed his men. After the rescue, the military tried to treat me like a hero, the sole survivor, the brave man who overcame tragedy. But to me, those words were a direct insult to the men who had died. I refused all medals and all honors. I decided to leave the Japanese self-defense forces. I could never be responsible for another life. I didn't deserve it. I was running from myself, from the inescapable label of murderer, hidden beneath a brilliant record. A sudden, dull throbbing in my left leg snapped me out of the nightmare. The old wound was acting up like a poisoned tooth. I clenched my hand hard over the scar. It was then I felt a single, quiet tear track down my temple. It was the tears of my soul that I had never let anyone see. I didn't want to leave this hole. In fact, I felt this was exactly where I belonged, the punishment fitting my crime. Just as I gave up all hope, I heard a strange sound in the distance. Hum, hum. It was a low, nerve-grating hum that made the air vibrate. The sound grew louder, eventually changing into the high-pitched shriek of an emergency siren that enveloped the entire base. Jake's eyes snapped open. The despair was gone, replaced by a sharp light, like a sleeping predator suddenly awake. Something is happening. Something huge is going down at this base. The blaring siren was aggressively beating against his eardrums, as if trying to shake loose the ghosts of his past. The emergency ripped through the base without warning. But the immediate silence that followed was ominous, a strange calm before a storm that frayed the nerves of every soldier. Even in the brig, Jake could hear the hurried footsteps of combat boots in the hallway. He felt it in his gut, something serious had gone down. The chaos centered on the first armory, the heart of the base. The thick steel door, which should have been secured by electronic locks, had been violently pried open. Inside, MPs were sweeping their flashlights around, desperately trying to assess the situation. "Report the damage," the executive officer's deep voice boomed through the echoing armory. A young soldier reported, his voice shaking. "Sir, one XM-800, the latest prototype sniper rifle kept in the secure rack, is missing. No other damage is confirmed at this time." "Young man, do you have any idea how serious that is? That rifle contains the highest level, unreleased military secrets of this country." The executive officer yelled in a fit of rage and punched the wall. "Sir! Look over here." It was Alex who spoke up, leading the security detail. Her expression was one of someone who had just made a horrific discovery. She pointed at the control panel of the electronic lock that had been forced open. In the corner of the panel, a clear, bloody smudge of a fingerprint was left behind, visible even without forensic powder. The executive officer gasped. Alex, as if on cue, spoke the rehearsed line in a trembling voice. "There's no mistake. That's the fingerprint of the Japanese cleaner, Kuroda, that I saw at the firing range. I clearly remember he had a cut right here on this spot on his finger when he was taking the gun apart." As if to back up her lie, the armory technician next to her nodded, his face pale. I think I saw it too," he whispered, the false testimony she had drilled into him beforehand. The circumstantial evidence was perfect. Unknown background, special forces level weapons knowledge, and now the damning fingerprint. Everything clicked into place. Kuroda Kenji was an enemy spy after all, and he had used the confusion to steal the base's highest level secret. The brig door was violently flung open again. Jake looked up to see Colonel Williams, his face a mask of rage, completely devoid of reason, along with several heavily armed MPs. "Kuroda Kenji, your cover is blown," the colonel stated in a voice as cold as ice. Jake stood up without a word. In a split second, all the pieces snapped together in his mind. Alex's terrified face earlier, she was using him as a scapegoat to save her career. A ruthless, dirty, but effective trap. Rage boiled in his gut, but it was overshadowed by a deep, crushing sense of despair. There was no defense. Anything he yelled now would be dismissed as the last desperate act of a spy. He was completely cornered. "You are under arrest for espionage and theft of military property. I will hear no objections." An MP grabbed Jake's arms behind his back and snapped the cold, metal handcuffs on. "Catch on." The sound echoed in the cell, like the final judgment being passed. As Jake was dragged toward the command center, Colonel Williams delivered the final blow. It was the decision of the military council. "You will be forcibly extradited to the mainland tomorrow morning. You will face a formal court-martial there. Do not expect to see the sun again." It was a sentence equivalent to death. Would he rot away in a dark prison in a foreign country, framed and forgotten? Was this the final, manufactured despair that awaited him after running from the loss of his comrades? Jake bit down hard on his lip. The taste of blood filled his mouth, the bitter taste of a devastating, unfair defeat. The next morning, the ground was cold in the pre-dawn air. A windowless vehicle, ready to transport Jake, sat quietly parked in front of the command center. His forced extradition was moments away. His face was blank as the MPs led him out of the building. There was no emotion, only a deep sense of resignation in his eyes. Colonel Williams and the executive officer watched, arms crossed, like triumphant generals. For them, this was the just execution of a threat to national security. Alex was also there, a subtle smirk of relief and victory playing on her lips. It was all over. Her future was safe. "Take him away," a voice commanded. Two MPs grabbed Jake's arms and started dragging him toward the van. "Hold on, Colonel." A powerful voice, unexpected by everyone present, rang out. It was Command Sergeant Major Davis. He'd clearly been up all night investigating. His eyes were sharp, and a tablet computer was clutched in his hand like a weapon. He stood before Colonel Williams, ignoring protocol, and looked him straight in the eye. I am demanding you halt the extradition of Kuroda Kenji immediately. He is not a spy. This entire incident is a carefully constructed, dirty trap. What are you talking about, Sergeant Major? Have you lost your mind? The executive officer yelled. Davis didn't flinch. He turned to the colonel. I saw his movements yesterday at the range. That was not a cleaner's movement, but it wasn't a spy's either. It was the movement of a true professional, someone who knows weapons inside and out, beyond any lieutenant colonel's gaze. And at the same time, I saw it, the lying, manufactured look in Sergeant Vance's eyes when she framed him. Alex gasped, shrinking back. Davis gave her a brief, dismissive glance, then turned back to the colonel, shoving the tablet screen forward. This is yesterday's mess hall security footage. The screen clearly shows Sergeant Vance openly insulting Kuroda in front of a room full of soldiers, saying she'd give him $100 if he fixed her gun. This shows she had a clear motive to frame him. She feared that her career would be ruined because the rifle defect Kuroda pointed out was actually her own maintenance error. Davis swiped the screen, showing the next piece of evidence. And here are the armory access logs and surveillance footage. Sergeant Vance called the armory technician just before the incident was reported, giving him instructions. And immediately afterward, there was a suspicious outside access log on the armory system at a time when she shouldn't have been there. She was likely trying to cover her tracks. Then came the clincher. He zoomed in on a part of the footage, showing a blurry shadow carrying the rifle out of the armory door. The boots the culprit is wearing, they are a specialized, commercially available model, different from standard issue. And the owner of those boots on this entire base is only one person, Sergeant Major Alex Vance. A small, choked scream escaped Alex's throat. Her perfect plan was crashing down around her. Colonel Williams's stare drilled into her like a drill bit. The executive officer looked back and forth between Alex and Davis in disbelief. Cornered. No escape. All her lies exposed. In that moment, something inside Alex snapped. Her expression vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, terrifying madness. Shut up, she hissed, and with lightning speed, drew the personal handgun she had concealed in her belt. She aimed the weapon directly at the man who had exposed her. Shut up, you traitor. Her maddened scream ripped through the cold morning air. Soldiers yelled in panic. Everyone was frozen, bracing for the inevitable shot. Alex's finger twitched slightly on the trigger. The world seemed to stretch to its breaking point only inside Jake's mind. The shocked faces of the soldiers, the dust motes hanging in the air, the crazy light in Alex's eyes, everything moved in slow motion. His brain didn't think, the sleeping predator inside him tore through the chains of despair and regret. Combat instinct took over. Thud. A dull, sickening impact of flesh on bone rang out. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of Jake, still handcuffed behind his back, slamming his steel-hard elbow into the ribcage of the MP holding his right arm. The MP gasped and crumpled to the ground. The other MP, who was holding Jake's left arm, stared in confusion. In that instant, Jake was already moving. He spun halfway, using the falling MP's body as a shield, closing the desperate distance between himself and Alex in a flash. The movement was inhuman, smooth, fluid, and incredibly fast, as if gravity didn't exist. Alex, terrified, screamed and tried to pull the trigger. But before her finger could complete its movement, Jake's foot, kicking up from the ground, snapped up and precisely struck her wrist. Snap! A sickening crunch of bone, and Alex screamed as the pistol flew up into the air. Before the gun could hit the ground, Jake had already plunged into her space. He used his handcuffed arms like a single, massive club, perfectly taking control of her neck and arms simultaneously. It was the ultimate restraint technique, stripped of all wasted motion, aimed only at neutralization. Thud. The air left Alex's body. She went limp in Jake's grasp, on the verge of unconsciousness. Moments later, the pistol hit the asphalt with a hollow, useless clatter. The resulting silence was absolute. Everyone held their breath. Colonel Williams, the executive officer, even Command Sergeant Major Davis, they just stood there, stunned, unable to believe what they had just seen. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds of real time, but it felt like a flash of lightning. An unarmed man, still handcuffed, neutralized 2 well-trained MPs and disarmed an armed opponent without a scratch. It wasn't human skill. It wasn't the movement of a trained soldier. It was the movement of a combat professional. No, it was something more. A chill ran down Davis's spine. Jake slowly set Alex's body down on the ground, then used his foot to calmly pull the discarded pistol close to him. He looked at the remaining MP and spoke, his voice quiet, almost an order, but devoid of emotion. The key to the cuffs. As if hypnotized, the MP fumbled for the key in his pocket and unlocked Jake's handcuffs. Free, Jake picked up the pistol and, with a practiced motion, dropped the magazine, ejected the live round from the chamber, and rendered the weapon completely useless. He then gently slid the gun to Colonel Williams's feet. He said nothing else. He just stood there quietly. But his presence was now completely different. He was no longer the suspect or the cleaner. He was the absolute superior, the one man who effortlessly dominated everyone in that yard, regardless of rank, pride, or nationality. Colonel Williams looked from the pistol at his feet to Jake's face. The anger and rage were gone, replaced by a primal fear of a power far beyond his understanding. He snatched the satellite phone from the trembling comm specialist and shouted, "Connect me to the highest intelligence office in the Japanese government via the Pentagon. Emergency. I need a Delta Echo Alpha level background check on the man standing here, Kuroda Kenji." The response came quickly. The voice on the other end delivered a message so unbelievable that Williams could only stand there, completely speechless. Colonel Williams stood there, the satellite phone pressed to his ear, a look of utter shock washing over his face. The voice coming through the highly secured, multi-cipher hotline between the United States and Japan was tight with tension. Sweat beaded on the colonel's forehead. After a few agonizing seconds, he let his arm drop heavily to his side, his eyes wide and vacant. Then, slowly, as if observing a creature he'd never seen before, he looked at Jake Riley. His voice, completely devoid of the authority it held moments ago, trembled slightly. "Unbelievable," he choked out. Then, addressing every single soldier on the field, he made a formal, stark declaration. "His name is Lieutenant Colonel Kuroda Kenji, retired, formerly of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces Special Operations Group, the Special Assault Group." The name alone, Special Assault Group, SAG, made the blood drain from the faces of Command Sergeant Major Davis and other senior enlisted men. This wasn't just any special unit, it was the elite of the elite within the Japanese military, specializing in counterterrorism and counter-guerrilla warfare. Their very existence was top secret, earning them the nickname, Japan's Green Berets. Their selection criteria, training, and missions were all cloaked in the highest level of national security. Colonel Williams continued, sounding like he was recounting a nightmare, and that's not all. He was a legendary ace within that unit, successfully completing countless high-risk missions, feared by the enemy under the codename Phantom. Almost every record of his operations remains classified. And why he left the JSDF and is here now is also a secret of the highest order. The firing range fell into a dead silence. The soldiers were processing what they had done. They had looked down on him as just a cleaner, treated him like dirt, and subjected him to humiliation. They had called him a spy, trapped him in a vicious plot, and tried to ruin his life. The man they had been mocking was a legend, an existence light years beyond their reach, a true national hero the government itself was tasked to protect and hide. Every piece clicked into place. The surgical gun disassembly, the instantaneous diagnosis of a fatal defect, the almost superhuman way he neutralized Alex, it was all perfectly consistent with his background. The soldiers' eyes all turned to Alex, lying still on the ground. The weight of her crime settled heavily on their chests. She hadn't just insulted a cleaner, she had disgraced the face of an ally nation's hero. Jake spoke quietly, his voice flat. "It's over now, isn't it?" He showed no interest in the revelation of his identity or the sudden reversal of everyone's attitude. "My reason for leaving the JSDF was just personal. I was injured during an operation and failed to save my men. That's all. I am no hero. I am only a loser." The soldiers gasped. The profound despair in his eyes, the haunted look they'd sometimes seen, it all stemmed from an unshakable, traumatic past. They finally understood. He hadn't run from glory, he had run from the immense guilt of his mistake and the weight of the lives he couldn't save. He had come to a foreign land, discarded his name and past, and simply tried to atone for his sin quietly as a cleaner. Why, they wondered, did he have to suffer this unbearable humiliation? No apology or word of comfort would be enough. The answer to why the legendary Phantom was standing here was far sadder and more human than they could have imagined. They could only stare in stunned silence at the hero bearing such immeasurable solitude and pain. With Jake's identity revealed, the atmosphere on the base completely changed. Colonel Williams, in front of his troops, performed a formal salute to Jake. It was an act that transcended rank and nationality, showing the highest respect and deepest apology to a military legend. "Mr. Kuroda, sir, I sincerely apologize for our inexcusable and foolish behavior. I am truly sorry." Following the colonel's lead, the executive officer, Command Sergeant Major Davis, and every soldier present snapped to attention and bowed their heads. The men who had mocked him yesterday now stood like sinners before a judge, silently begging for forgiveness. Jake looked at them with a quiet, distant expression. He neither accepted nor refused their apology, he just stood there. His heart was no longer focused on this place. Alex was formally arrested after being transported to the base medical facility. Her crimes, theft of military property, assault on a superior officer, and slander against an allied serviceman, meant her once brilliant career was definitively over, destined to end in a court-martial. The last words anyone heard her mutter before she was taken away were a barely audible, "I'm sorry." The soldier's attitude towards Jake did a complete 180. Everyone wanted to talk to him, hear his stories, and be his friend, desperately trying to make up for the previous day. But Jake refused to join them. He politely but firmly declined their offers of food and drink. He wasn't a hero or a legend, he needed to be alone to face his guilt. The change in their attitude was just a new weight for him to bear. The only person he spoke to was Command Sergeant Major Davis. One evening, Davis quietly approached Jake while he stood alone on the deserted firing range. "I'm sorry," Davis simply said. It was an apology for the wrongs committed by his men and a deep regret for not seeing Jake's solitude sooner. Jake turned around, his expression soft for the first time. "You don't need to apologize. You tried to see the truth. That is enough." A moment of quiet understanding passed between them, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. "What will you do now?" Davis asked. Jake's situation was a highly delicate diplomatic issue, and Colonel Williams, as a gesture of apology, had offered Jake a massive salary to stay on as a special military consultant. It was an offer that could have restored his lost honor many times over. But Jake quietly shook his head. "I cannot fight anymore. My battlefield is gone." His battlefield wasn't a place where bullets flew. It was the ghosts of the past within his own heart, the guilt of losing his men and the sin of surviving. He had been fighting that unseen enemy alone for years. Davis understood the true meaning of his words perfectly. True strength wasn't about the power to defeat an enemy or the skill to handle a weapon, it was the quiet resilience of the soul that never turns away from its own weakness and past. The man before him had the strongest soul, but it was profoundly scarred and exhausted. "I see," Davis said, and said no more, simply watching the sun sink below the horizon with Jake. A few days later, Colonel Williams received Jake's official reply. It was a calm, unshakable refusal of all offers and a statement of his intent to leave the base and the military organization entirely. The colonel tried repeatedly to persuade him with every honorable position imaginable, but Jake's answer was always the same: I respectfully decline. I no longer have the right. Everyone now understood that the right he spoke of wasn't military capability, but the heavy cross he had placed on himself. He believed he could only save his soul by putting down the gun and completely removing himself from any position of responsibility for another person's life. On the morning of his departure, Jake quietly packed his few belongings, a few changes of clothes and an old book. That was it. He carefully folded his cleaner's uniform, placing it gently on the cot, the only proof of his existence there. Command Sergeant Major Davis met him at the door. They exchanged no words, and Davis quietly took his small bag. As they walked toward the main gate, the soldiers working on the training field stopped what they were doing and saluted Jake. It was not required by regulation, it was a spontaneous act of heartfelt respect. Jake didn't return the salute, but walked on, staring straight ahead. The gate was in sight, and beyond it lay the unknown future he had chosen, the solitary journey to finally face the ghosts of his past. There was no shadow of darkness on his face, only the gentle light of someone who had found the exit to a long tunnel. Just a few yards from the gate, a military vehicle sped around them and stopped abruptly. The executive officer jumped out, an embarrassed look on his face. "Mr. Kuroda, there's someone who wishes to meet with you. We got special, emergency permission, but there's absolutely no pressure to accept." "A meeting?" Jake asked, surprised. Davis was also confused. Who would ask now? The executive officer, though clearly uncomfortable, stated the name plainly. Sergeant Major Alex Vance. Davis immediately protested strongly that Jake had no obligation to see her. But Jake responded quietly and instantly, "I will see her." The meeting took place in a small interrogation room on the base, just a table and 2 chairs. Alex, already waiting, stood up jerkily when Jake appeared. She was utterly changed. Her face, devoid of makeup, was pale, and her once confident eyes were now sunken with deep regret and despair. Wearing an ill-fitting prisoner's jumpsuit instead of her uniform, she looked small and broken. Jake sat down across from her. Alex remained standing, her dry lips trembling as she struggled to speak. I did something unforgivable to you," she finally choked out, her voice rough. "I can never apologize enough. My pride, my envy, it ruined your life." Tears streamed down her face. "But, please, let me say this, if you hadn't pointed out that defect in the gun, the next person to use it would have been one of my men. You were insulting me, and yet you saved a life that was important to me. I have lost everything, my career, my trust, my future. But maybe that's what I needed," she whispered. "When I was looking into your quiet eyes, I finally understood what a bad, foolish person I was. You destroyed my life, but at the same time, you killed the fake me." She collapsed to her knees, sobbing like a child, pressing her forehead to the floor. Jake slowly stood up. He didn't look down at her, but walked toward the door. He stopped once, his back still turned, and said quietly, "You go your own way, too. The past can never be erased." It wasn't a word of forgiveness, but it wasn't a word of rejection either. It was a quiet send-off from one soul, one who also carried the burden of the past, to another. The look on Jake's face as he left the room was serene. He had cut one of the last chains that bound him. The dawn light waited for him beyond the gate. After Lieutenant Colonel Kuroda Kenji left the base like the wind, a quiet but profound change settled over those he left behind. The base routine seemed normal, the morning siren, the drill chants, the mess hall hustle, but the hearts of the soldiers who made up that routine were changed. The most noticeable shift was the fading of the arrogant atmosphere that had permeated the unit. The careless jokes and condescending attitudes based on race or rank disappeared. Everyone became acutely aware of the weight of their words. They had learned, to their bones, how deeply their thoughtless words had wounded a quiet soul. In the corner of the training ground, young soldiers were often seen gathered during breaks, looking vaguely into the sky and murmuring. "Man, what is real strength, anyway?" one would ask. "Don't know," another would reply, "but I know it ain't about being good at shooting or fighting." The image of Jake was permanently etched into their minds, his quiet eyes enduring the insult, his smooth fingers performing a miraculous repair, and the overwhelming stillness after he neutralized the threat. He never sought power or flaunted his honor, yet he controlled everything just by his presence. They had laughed at that man, called him a cleaner. That memory was a scar, a painful mark on their pride, but also a priceless lesson for their growth as soldiers and as men. Command Sergeant Major Davis watched these changes with a gentle, fatherly eye. After Jake left, Davis silently took up the role of a storyteller, ensuring Jake's history was not forgotten. At the end of a training day, Davis gathered the sweaty young men. "What did you learn from the man named Kuroda?" he asked. The soldiers hesitated, unable to find the right words. Davis continued softly, "True strength isn't about boasting power. It's not about seeking fame. It's the nobility of the soul that dwells in silence, the one that doesn't look away from its own weakness and sin, but quietly endures and overcomes it. That is true strength." His words weren't a lecture. They were a hard-won truth from a fellow soldier who had also made mistakes and lived with regret. He was no hero. He was a man, just like you, maybe more deeply wounded and struggling with his past. We couldn't even stand by him in his solitude. Instead, we collectively rubbed salt into his open wound. We must never forget that foolishness. His stern but loving gaze swept over their faces. Finally, he spoke with a powerful voice that sounded like Jake's final message, "But never forget. You were lucky. You breathed the same air as a man who might be a legend in history. Carry the meaning and the weight of that for the rest of your lives. That is the only atonement we can offer him." The existence of Kuroda Kenji was no longer a mere past event. It became a myth on that base, an eternal compass to guide them when they were lost. What Jake left behind was not just shame and silence, but a quiet, powerful question about how a person should live. How much time had passed? Kuroda Kenji was in a small, nameless seaside town. The gentle air, mixed with the scent of salt, softly brushed his hair. He was no longer running or haunted by nightmares, he lived quietly, integrated into the town's fabric. He worked at a small shipyard. His job was to scrape rust off old fishing boats and repaint them. The cold metal he once handled was a tool for taking life, the warm, thick paint in his hands now was a tool for supporting livelihoods, sending boats out to the life-giving sea. No one here knew his past. They called him Mr. Kuroda, a quiet, honest man whose work was meticulous. Children played around him, and a friendly dog would nap at his feet. It was the ordinary, peaceful life he had always quietly searched for. One morning, he woke up earlier than anyone and walked alone on the beach. The sound of the waves was like a gentle lullaby. The line between the sky and the sea slowly began to blur, and then a fiery orange light spilled over the horizon. Dawn. He stared silently at the magnificent birth of the light. The deep darkness that once clouded his eyes was gone. All that remained was the quiet, serene light of someone who had survived the night. He was no longer consumed by self-blame. The past of losing his friends would never disappear, that pain would be a part of his soul forever. But he was no longer ruled by it. He chose to embrace the pain and sadness and walk forward. When he left the JSDF, he called himself a loser. He may have lost the most important battle, the one to save his men. But in the longer, more solitary battle with his own heart, he had not lost. He had, deep down, forgiven Alex. She was just another person who had broken under her own weakness. The events at the Fort Liberty base, for both him and those who remained, may have been the necessary crucible to teach them what true strength really was. The sun fully rose above the horizon, filling the world with new light and hope. Kuroda took a slow, deliberate step toward that dazzling light. In his hand, there was no mop to wash away past sins. He held his own future, unbound by anyone. No one knew where he was going or what life he would lead. But the story quietly closes here, leaving a haunting, warm resonance in our hearts. True strength is not measured by speed, force, or volume. It resides in the quiet light emitted by those who have known the deepest darkness, the nobility of the soul that faces its weakness and yet never stops moving forward. The figure of a man walking toward the rising sun told us everything. What would you do in Jake's place when your honor is ruined, but you have deadly power? Write in the comments.